So with the Miss South Africa organization giving up the Miss World license for the first time since 1956, I thought it would be fitting to finally do a very in-depth series about the history of South Africa at Miss World. Starting with the early years of Miss South Africa at Miss World. Now, the early years of Miss South Africa at Miss World consisted of a low period as well as a high period. The Miss South Africa organization was established in 1956 and it was open to only white women. Keep in mind, Miss World was established in 1951 already, but Miss South Africa only began in 1956. And like I said before, white women only. And by that, I mean white women only. So no Indians, no Asians, no mixed race people, even though there are lots of different ethnicities in South Africa, and obviously, especially no black women were allowed. It was pretty harsh. And this rule persisted for a very long time. They held the Miss World license only from the very beginning, so from 1956, and they actually only obtained the Miss Universe license 42 years later in 1998. So the Miss South Africa organization held the Miss World license and the Miss World license only for a whole 42 years officially. The very first Miss South Africa was Norma Vorster, and unfortunately, she went unplaced at Miss World, but to be fair, placements in this year only consisted of a top 6. So who knows whether or not she would have placed in the top 40 or whatever we have nowadays. After this initial year of not placing, South Africa experienced a high period during its early years, starting in 1957 with Adele, who ended up as a second runner-up at Miss World this year. Then, obviously, in 1958, the beautiful Penelope Coelen was crowned Miss World 1958. This was South Africa's very first Miss World title and also South Africa's very first major international title ever. Penelope is actually a very lovely lady, and she's now 83 and actually luckily still alive as of making this video and living in Durban still. In 1959, Moya Meaker was sent to Miss World and she ended up in the top 11. In 1960, we had Denise Muir going to Miss World and she was the second runner-up at Miss World 1960. In 1961, Yvonne Hulley took up the mantle as Miss South Africa and she eventually placed in the top 15 at Miss World 1961. And in 1962, we had a second Yvonne Ficker, who eventually placed as the third runner-up at Miss World 1962. So definitely not a bad start for South Africa at Miss World. Unfortunately, from 1963 onwards, South Africa did experience a little bit of a low period at Miss World. In 1963, Louise Crous went unplaced at Miss World, and at this Miss World pageant, the Continental Queens were actually crowned for the first time, and we had Liberia winning Miss World Africa and not South Africa, which later on South Africa is going to be nothing but Miss World Africas. Okay, in 1964, Vedra Karamitas went to Miss World and unfortunately also went unplaced. So did Carrol, who represented South Africa at Miss World 1965. Unfortunately, 3 years of non-placements. That is a bit tough. Luckily, Johanna Carter was Miss South Africa 1966 and she managed a top 15 placement at Miss World, as did Miss South Africa 1967 Disa Duivestein, who luckily managed a top 15 placement at Miss World. Then, unfortunately, came Mitzianna, who competed at Miss World 1968 representing South Africa, and she unfortunately went unplaced. And after this, South Africa started going through a different type of issue. But first off, they had to end the beginning years, the starter years, with Collett, who actually managed a pretty good placement. Looking at the previous like 7 placements, she managed a top 7 placement, which is quite decent at Miss World 1969. Of course, if you're a pageant lover, you know what happens to Miss South Africa after Miss World 1969. I definitely think that Eric had a bit of a, soft spot in his heart for South Africa, because the lengths this man went through in order to accommodate South Africa's apartheid regime during the 70s is insane. So that's what we're going to be talking about next. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!